LMtv here. Today we're going to be tackling bisexual representation in the media. A quick summary on it, as a fellow bisexual. Over the course of time, bisexuals have been inherently kept out of media because of biphobia and not a lot of shows representing the in-between of gay, straight, and how they really intermingle with each other. There have been a lot of examples of this through the past, from the movies all the way coming from the 60s to today. A lot of these movies often portray it as an in-between stage, or as a stage of where it's uncertainty and not fully actualize the self. There's a lot of codes like the Hays Code that would keep from proper LGBTQ representation and artists from expressing their true identities and true LGBTQ stories that were not represented during the time. The Hays Code was a self-imposed industry set of guidelines for all the motion pictures that were released between 1934 and 1968. The code prohibited profanity, suggestive nudity, graphic or realistic violence, sexual persuasions, and rape. Within that sexual pervasions, that included the LGBTQ community. Even though we have been represented in the past and that we have been here for the beginning of time, it is still taking this long in order for us to be properly represented. In the Netflix documentary Disclosure, it mentioned on how a lot of trans media was often negative, but it was also the only trans media that a lot of kids and even trans kids would be exposed to. So in looking for themselves, they were looking for themselves in these movies that had negative portrayals of themselves. There have been a lot of examples of how this misrepresentation has been present in a lot of straight-leaning films where we have Mirror Your Gaze, where a lot of LGBTQ characters are often introduced and then killed off immediately due to ratings or issues with production. Also, queer coding, which would be that was most used during earlier times like the 1970s and 1960s, where they weren't really able to show explicitly that somebody was LGBTQ+, so they would use effeminate men or different codes or like certain dress in order to communicate that these characters were not part of the usual status quo of being straight, and they would use these codes in order to portray these characters in a sense to make sure that they are able to go around the Hays Code. But with those stereotypes that were formed due to those queer coding, it has only affected us in the negative in the long term. Another example would be queer baiting, and with queer baiting, which is more prevalent now, is to be able to get more watches from the LGBTQ community during ratings. They will queer bait a character. I will be talking about The Fox, a 1967 movie about two women who live in the Canadian countryside in a house that they rented out from an older man, and they live together happily out to their own devices as best friends, though one of them is harboring feelings that they both have unspoken. Then the father-son comes in and messes up things for them. The next movie I will be talking about is Bound from 1996, which is about two women who are stuck in the crime life that are trying to escape, and both of them do have feelings for each other but are trying to take advantage of the men that are attracted to them in order to escape with their own lives for themselves. Then the most current show would be Heartstopper, a show that has started in 2022, which is still currently running and has been a saving grace for representation in LGBTQ+ kids and also for positive representations of bisexuals. With these movies, I will be showing the examples of how internalized homophobia, over-sexualization, and burn your queers, both light and regular, and how it has affected representation of bisexuals through media. And in Still Trapped in the U.S. Media Closet, Representations of Gender Variant Pre-Adolescent Children, it is noted by Tony Kelso that studies on the U.S. media depictions of young children who depart from gender norms or hint at very openly expressed same-sex attraction have almost been entirely absent. Queer children thus face absent stereotyping in media, and their experiences often go unnoticed except by those who know them personally or by others in the LGBTQ community who who have experienced similar silencing. With these movies, they have been able to give a perspective that may have seemed absolutely radical just because it was hidden, but now we are dealing with the aftermath of having that representation not work for the better. And these kids are needing proper representation in order to understand that they are seen and that they have a place in this life too. The Fox from 1967 is a film that portrays two women who have been living in the countryside for quite some time and have a good life together. They go through the movie, and it's not until the farmer's son comes in that where they start to experience different horrible happenings, where they actually find Paul, which is the farmer's son that comes by, and Jill and March, which are the two women that are living together. Paul tries to pursue March in order to take her hand in marriage, not to only take the farm back, but also because he grows interest in them as they take him in while there's a huge storm coming. Jill, who has found feelings for her, even though there are several cutscenes of March being shown as having feelings for Jill. There's also a lot of internalized homophobia that March is dealing with. She is looking at the character of the fox that comes by their house every so often and realizes that she definitely has harbored feelings for Jill. But in the internalized homophobia action, she completely suppresses it until Jill is the one that comes forward and comes clean about the love that she has for her. It goes through them trying to navigate living with Paul and also the jealousies that they feel with each other. It ends up to where Paul starts to threaten March with violence in order to get her to marry him, but shown as a type of love story of where it's meant for him to be with her, even though Jill is opposing. It then cuts down to where March decides not to leave with Paul and comes back to Jill, realizing that she does have feelings for her. There's actually a really loving scene where they are both shown being together without the queer baiting. Though the entire first half of the movie was heavily queer baited due to a lot of Hays codes in the 60s that were often being broken but were still being stigmatized now. These scenes were very important and quite surprising, especially since this movie was made in 1967. After they confess their love for each other, March and Jill interact with Paul again as he comes back for March after the year-long trip that he needed to take on that March decided not to go on with him. At that point, Paul is very bitter that they are together, and he tries and helps them by cutting down a tree. In the movie, it is shown that it was on accident, but due to the context, it definitely seems like Paul was intentionally trying to get the tree to fall down at the right point to get Jill. This is when the example of bury your gays come in, because Jill is killed off at this point. And in a very, very sad scene of March being heartbroken, Paul swoops in and tries to convince her to marry him and be with him. March hesitantly does, but in the loving last scene, March looks back on the chicken farm and thinks about her late love, Jill. During this movie, there's a lot of over-sexualization with March, as it is only March that sleeps with Jill and also Paul. With this, March is dealing with a lot of feelings, and during this movie, it's shown that she's unsure of who she is and that uncertainty. With this over-sexualization, she tries to overcompensate it with being attached to Paul, but also with Jill. And in this movie, she is seen as the one who has uncontrollable actions, just like the Fox, which is a reoccurring character. With the Hays Code, a lot of the queer baiting with these movies is that March has a more masculine appearance than Jill, and Jill is more pleasant and feminine. But with this, it made sense that March would be the one to be over-sexualized just in the sense of that movie because of stereotypes that bisexual women were over-sexualized, but also for that masculinization to where she could be the partner for Jill, but not too masculine for Paul. The reasons why this doesn't represent bisexuals in a very nice way is mostly because Jill is immediately killed off and that they don't have a life together, but that immediately when she dies, that she goes with Paul, and that Jill didn't mean that much to her just because it was a relationship with a woman. In that sense, the representation of bisexuality is not shown properly there, and especially with the queer baiting throughout the rest of the movie, and how it is shown that it's a fling and not as serious as it would have been with Paul. Bound is a movie created in 1996 of two women who are trying to escape their crime-filled lives in order to live with each other freely, and also are stuck with the options of needing to use their own bodies for the gain of their own safety. The two leading characters in this movie are Violet and Corky. Violet is a bisexual woman who is very good looking and also has a bit of a flapper girl aura to herself. This is important in her relation with Corky, as Corky is a very hypermasculine hitman that helps build and fix a lot of different items within the gang, but are also coincidentally in the same work as Violet, but Violet is mostly there as an escort for the main crime boss. They meet each other by living next door to each other and realizing that they both have around the same line of work. They then grow and have feelings for each other and start to plot a way in order to overthrow their different crime bosses. These crime bosses are affiliated with Violet and definitely see her as more of a target and like over sexualized, but do not know about her other identity, which would be being also attracted to women. Corky, it's all more known that she is that she does have an attraction to women because of the way she dresses, and also the stereotypes of the masculine and feminine areas that she is represented in, which would be the more masculine area. With this, they create a unstoppable pair, and through a lot of violence and a lot of hurt, they're able to run free with each other at the end, but they deal with a lot of traumas and a lot of fighting just to be together. In this movie, there is a lot of over-sexualization, especially with Violet, and how there is a scene where she talks more about how she had to do this in order to survive, and that Corky wouldn't know just because it was something that she did not have to deal with, or that it was something that she just had to do from a very young age. Her and Corky have multiple scenes where they are intimate with each other, but also very emotionally intimate with each other. And this would be one step forward in a good direction for queerbaiting, where both of these characters, though one of them being over-sexualized bisexual, but that there actually are seen having a relationship with each other and caring for each other in this movie. Though, with Bury Your Gaze Light, these characters are shown to be very traumatized and very torn, and that it could be a presenting factor for their attractions for each other, but also that throughout the movie they have to go through more issues and more problems in order to be free with each other without fear of being hurt or killed. This would be a harmful representation, especially since it translates to that a lot of bisexuals and people in the LGBTQ community have no opportunity to have a happy and calm life just because it is portrayed that they may not be able to be completely there for each other, and that others may be continuing to try and take advantage of them just as they've taken advantage of Violet, or like a character like Corky, that they may never be able to find a relationship that would be meaningful to them just because of the circumstances that they are put into. Reasons why this creates different misrepresentations is just that the over-sexualization with Violet is very apparent, and also it focuses mostly on her conquest and using herself as a way to get out of her crime boss. It would translate to where that was one big part of her personality and very one-dimensional to who she is and what her goals are. There's really only one scene where she talks about her goals with Corky and the reasons why they run away, but other than that, it is mostly that they are trying to escape and be together. and no other aspects of their personalities other than their line of works have been apparent. Heartstopper, a show started in 2022 based off of Alice Hoffman's webtoon that was created about Nick and Charlie. It's two high schoolers that have feelings for each other, but the interesting part is that it explores Nick's bisexuality throughout the entirety of the show. It goes through bullying that they both experienced and that the changes that are going through their lives while in high school, but also finding out more about themselves. This show has been praised for its very positive depictions of relationships and also different identities other than just gay and straight. They show different identities of characters who are trans, characters who are polyamorous, characters who are bisexual, and that all of these characters, they are shown in a very positive light and a very regular light, one that shows the accuracy of being LGBTQ plus in a world that is not fit for them. They do a really good job with Nick and how it goes through his identity crisis, but also dealing with having family members that may not be 100% supportive of him. It also goes through the show of how Charlie's experiences have shaped the way he is, but also being the first and only out person at his school, at an all-boys school, and how that has affected him in his identity and also in his relationship with Nick. It changed in a lot of ways where the other misrepresentations of over-sexualization, bury your gaze, and also internalized homophobia is that it shows great examples of internalized homophobia, especially with the bully that torments Charlie throughout his entire journey, and also Nick. But this bully himself is also gay and has a relationship with Charlie, and how the bully actually started to affect Charlie's relationship with Nick, but also how it's shown where the bully was manipulative but also seeking a relationship with them, just like how Paul was in the previous movie The Fox, and also how that internalized homophobia really affected the characters in big senses. But with this, Nick is shown as a very reserved person, which is the complete opposite of the over-sexualization misrepresentation of bisexuals in media. Nick is also shown to be kind of curious of like who he is, but really resonated with the term bisexual. There's even an episode where he is shown doing quizzes and doing research on whether or not his identity is one that fits him best. There's a lot of issues with bullying here, and that is accurately depicted on how kids would treat others during this time, and also just coming out as not straight. It's definitely a very wonderful change, but there is still more to be done, as a lot of these characters, there's a lot of complaints of the show where it's not as interesting or not full in depth and kind of just fluffy. But I feel like it's a good step in the right direction for positive representation and accurate depiction of bullying. In the article of how it's represented, Queering Queer Theory, or why bisexuality matters, about 67% of queer characters on television and 55% of queer characters in movies are gay men or lesbian women. Despite the bisexual people being estimated as a majority of the LGBTQ community in the United States, these numbers show that it's otherwise. There are a lot of ways that this can be improved. The way that this can be improved for Hollywood, and also accurate depiction of bisexuals, which are not shown to be over-sexualized, dealing with internalized homophobia, or having to deal with a lot of life-changing things or horrible events in order for them to earn their bisexuality, such as Charlie, such as Violet, and such as March. The ways that Hollywood can improve their representation of bisexuals is trying to limit the amount of over-sexualization, but also trying to represent the wholeness of the identity itself and not have it be a stop onto something else, including having it be the stop between internalized homophobia and bullying others to accepting yourself as a gay man. Bisexuality should not be the only representation of that in-between period. Also, showing that bisexuals will have to earn their keep or go through a lot of turbulent things in their life in order to become an actualized bisexual and not sleep with multiple people in order to understand that they are bisexual, but rather to understand that they are just from knowing deep down just as much as lesbian and gay counterparts. I feel that other ways that can be improved is that there could be actual gender studies writers that go in during these reading rooms and comb through and start to look at all the ways that these affect all these different stereotypes. And three suggestions I have for Hollywood, one of them already mentioned, is just bringing queer writers into spaces that, and also have gender studies officials to be present for read alongs, to be able to be there and kind of comb through and say, like, hey, this is not that accurate for this identity, and you're kind of going farther into these misrepresentations that were started by the Hays Code and then to queer baiting because it was just something that was not interested, but also just showing more interest in creating bisexual stories that have multiple layers, like Moonlight and just like characters in Call Me by Your Name. There are ways to make it very creative, and it's such a wide range of stories that can be told that it's a very missed opportunity for Hollywood to look into that. Also, to support smaller queer writers by creating writing guilds or scholarships that for more scripts to be written or for these stories to be adapted and improved, just like Heartstopper, which started as a webtoon and then turned into a whole show. I feel that having incentives like that in order to get good queer stories, especially surrounded by bisexuals, in order to be more represented in the media. They are out there. They just need the funding and support to make their dreams come true and to make these movies come to life. And I would say also giving priority to LGBTQ actors and actresses in these films, as well as giving priority to these writers, but giving a little bit more incentives, but showing that there is a market for these stories, such as Heartstopper and how it's blown up on Netflix, and other stories that, considering it is one of the biggest LGBTQ plus groups in the entire United States, going all the way from 1967 to today, our identity has been misrepresented in many ways, just to show like internalized homophobia, over sexualization, and just the struggle that completely builds us who we are. I feel that with the representation that bisexuals have in the media, it is not enough, but there is still time for change. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments how many other movies you have seen with bisexuals in it, and have a wonderful afternoon.